So YouTube, is Clormo with another Logic Pro X tutorial. Today I'm going to be talking about Alchemy Inspector Group Controls, which is still under that sources subpage, parameters and everything that's in there. We're going to pick up where I left off on the previous video where I showed that editor. So without further ado, and to make sure that I get through this video as quickly as possible without too much fluff, let's go right into Logic Pro X. I have here the edit window for the sources. This is where I left off on the previous video. If you don't know how to get here, you have the source subpages, and in the global tab you can see the sources and some of the master controls. You have to go to one of the tabs. I am going to tab D, which is where I loaded that sample in the last video. I just need to go to the edit. In the previous video I explained the global controls, all these views, and this different drop downs here and the zones and the waveform. Today I'm going to be talking about this window here, which is the Inspector Group Controls. So the first thing I guess I need to mention is what are you able to do here with these parameters. So you can load multiple samples into the import browser, and you can group this into groups, obviously, and trigger them on their attack or release phase, and based on some Boolean logic parameters. And that's going to give you a further fine-tune and detail into how the sample is going to produce a sound, or is going to sound, also tied to MIDI information like I have here, which is pretty awesome in my opinion, and gives you much more power than what the ESX24 would do, which is very important to understand and get a grip of this, right? So let's start from top to bottom and let's go through this as fast as we can. First thing that it's presented to us is this group plus pop-up menu, and as you guessed it, if I press that plus, I get a pop-up menu and I get two group creation commands. One is empty and one's called import. When I go to empty, what I'm gonna have is that empty creates a new empty group like you have seen here. The new group name will appear right below any existing group in this window here, which is called the group list. You should get a sequential assigned number for drag group. This is why we get a 2. You can change that. I will show you in a second. The second group creation mode is import, and that's nothing more than your import browser. So if you are not familiar with this window here, I suggest you look at the video for the import browser that I already did in this mini series. Go back and watch that and get familiar with it. So you get the exact same parameters and options. You can load multiple and select multiple samples, drag them into the drop zone and import them, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to cancel that. Then, as I said, this window here is known as the group list. So what you need to do, or that allows you to do, is that if you double click, I can do a few things. Change the name of the group, which I'm going to change. Called tutorial just for sakes. Press enter, that's kept there. But then I have these 3 columns here. One is called the trigger, the other is the fade, and the other one is the poly. This is akin to the polyphony. To be able to change any of that, I still need to double click, and the first column, the trigger, you will set a trigger mode for all the zones in the group. Remember, these are my zones and this is my sample. I'm still carrying the sample for that group, but if I were to change the sample or samples and place them in different zones here, then what I'm telling you right now, or what I'm about to tell you, would make a little bit more sense. So right now it's empty, so it won't make that much sense, but just bear with me real quick. Then continuing with what I say with the trigger, you have 2 modes here, 2 triggers. You have the attack or release. As you remember, attack will be affected or affects or is related to the phase when you are pressing the note and when the sound is being produced or it's starting. The release would be the opposite, which would be when you release a note and when that sound is kind of dying, right, over time. This will help you group sounds that are more defined in the attack or release phase. So you can also add a type of reverb effect to sounds that do not have a long tail at the release phase, etc. So if you want to understand that in layman's terms, I can create groups of sounds that have their, I don't want to say definition, but are more prominent when they are in the release phase, right? When they're dying or when they are full. And I can also create groups with sounds that do the opposite, right? When you're in the attack phase. And that way I can trigger the groups and trigger effects, etc., based on these parameters. And that gives you a different layer of automation without having to modulate or do any crazy typical synth manipulation with the knobs and that type of thing. So you can set up in this window what you want to do, and that will be set up forever depending on what notes you press and what controllers you tie it to. So moving to the right, we have the fade, and this drop down is just going to give you numbers. And these numbers, what are they going to do? It's applied a fade out time when the attack trigger mode is active, or a fade in time when the release trigger mode is active. This fade here is more intended to be used with the release triggering, because you want to have like a fading effect on it, but you can also use it for attacking. The reason why it's more tailored for release is because you can create a crossfade between the main body of the note and the release phase of the sample, but you can still use it in attack mode. That's, you're not constrained. That's just a note that I wanted to make. Then to the right you have the poly, and you have also a bunch of numbers there. What the poly does is just sets the maximum polyphony value for the group. Remember, a polyphony is tied to the amount of voices that you have, which in turn will let you have more notes and in turn have chords be played and come through as expected, right? So all the sound comes through. So this is very important to understand, because if you want to play for your MIDI information, you want to make a chord progression, play some chords here and there, then that's going to create a different trigger effect if you tie it to a particular note range, etc., etc. Moving on here, down in this area, then we have what's called the group rules. The group rules are nothing more than this drop down that I have. I already have this one by default because that's the one that was brought with the sample when I brought it in from the import browser. You can control that from the import browser itself by what import mode you choose, but unless otherwise specified, you can also put any of these ones. The always would be the default one, so any zone will trigger the whole sample, right? What are group rules? They define when each group will trigger. Simple as that. So you can create and combine multiple rules using the Boolean logic, like I said, which is just controls like and, or not. And those are the only ones that are present in Alchemy. I don't know if they will add more later, or if the stock version of Alchemy standalone had different ones, but those are the ones that we have with logic. The default for a new group, like I said, is always set as always unless you specify it otherwise. You can click on a field to choose a role like this. So I have always, like I said, the zones in the group are always triggered when you're pressing a note at a certain key and velocity range. So that is tied mostly with these parameters here, but we're gonna see that in the next video. Round robin. When you create, you see I selected round robin and I created a new group rule. Round robin, what it's gonna do is it's gonna automatically switch between layers for each note. So multiple note presses will be different versions of a sample. And to the right of that we have the order. So you can choose up and down and give a specific value. So that's gonna set the playback order in round robin. You need 2 round robin groups for this to make any sense. Like if both have the same value, let me just show you real quick that concept. So if you have 2, right, or more, I would say the first one is 1 and the second one is 2. So it's just gonna alternate between them, between 1 and 2. So it's gonna go 1, 2, and then go to 1 again, depending on the controllers that I'm tying the group rule to. Like if both have the same value, which I can do right now, I can show you, both have 1 in this example, then the zones will trigger at the same time. So that's kind of similar to always, but not quite. Otherwise, the trigger will cycle the groups, like I said, from lowest to highest and then back to the lowest. And you can just put whatever value you want there. Let's go down the list again. Random, round robin. It's the same thing as round robin, but you don't get an option to put an order to it. It's just going to be random. So if I had 5 round robins here, different, I can't put an order, and we'll just go and cycle through the groups, etc., etc. Also have next key switch. This one's a little bit, or might be a little bit more complex to understand, but in reality it just takes practice. And the reason why I say this is because you can see this list, you have so many controls to tie to, including a specific node, key switch, and snaps. And I'm gonna explain to you what those are. Key switch essentially will switch a group on or off. It depends if you choose a transform pad position or the key switch parameters, or you can also assign key switching to a meeting node or a range of nodes, like I said. So a group can't be triggered until one of these nodes is played. And that's very unique and very important to understand. So you can go with any of this, but once you go to nodes, you will need a range, and unless that node is played, the group will not be switched or triggered. So snaps 1 through 8, those are just our transform paths, and depending on which one you choose, the group will be triggered only when that transform path is active. If you don't remember, when I did the overview of Alchemy, let me close this. These are your transform paths. You have 8 of them. So if you say, if you want to set this at snap 3 and snap 7, between those, unless I'm there in my transform paths, then the group will not be triggered. Second option that you can see is key switch, and you have 10 of those, and that's just the magnitude of the key switch, which is in the global source controls. So if you don't remember that, let me just close this real quick, and this is where that knob is at. So it goes from 1 to 10, and that's why you have from 1 to 10 on your key switch. What does that mean? Yeah, that means that you have 10 switches, and they will trigger a group when the knob is sent between whatever that range is. Since you can modulate the key switch knob that we have in the global parameters of the source subpage controls, actually, you can have a very complex set of changes automated at any given time. And moving on from that, you have then from C2 to G8, which is the full range of nodes that you see here, right? You see the whole thing, the whole zones, all those nodes there, and you can set from one to another. Let me just do it. Let's just say that from C2 to whatever, F#1 or something like that. So it highlights for you what those particular zones are that are gonna trigger with a key switch a particular group. So that's very important to know. Until you choose a different group, you won't be able to trigger any of that group unless you play those nodes specifically. Then let's see, well, moving down the line, we have controller. And before I talk about that, I think I missed something here. You can right click and delete any of the groups. That's an option there. Yeah, so back to controller. Controller is a switch that controller is a switch group that targets any of the performance controls in the perform area or MIDI controller value. So you get three options here. And these are type. You can choose any type of control. You can see it's a huge amount because there's a lot of controls available for Alchemy. Then these two are not labeled nicely, like you have here the trigger, the fade, and the poly, but bear with me here real quick. The value is just another set of numbers that you can give to it, and you're gonna define the range of values that trigger the group. So if I have one control with a range, the group will only be triggered that control when that control is between the range that I chose. You can set other groups with the same control in different range and switch between groups with a single controller. If the control can be modulated though, then you can go into more complex automation inside the same module. So that's similar to the key switch and using that key switch knob that you saw previous just a few minutes ago. Then after all that, I have explained all those group rules, right? We have this lonely guy here, which is another pop-up, which has and, or not, which are the logic Boolean controls or conditions. If you have been paying attention, you can see that aside from always, which would be all of the time, you go from round robin, you have them there. Random, round robin, you have logic Boolean control, key switch. All of the other ones do have it. So pretty important to note also that you have this delete, so you can delete that rule. But anyway, going back to this logic, right? The logic will define a condition for multiple group rules, which is similar to programming. It's very similar. I'm not saying that you need to know any programming to be able to do this. You certainly don't have to. And after I explain, you will get the gist of it. But if you have programmed before, this is probably going to be simpler to understand, and maybe you will be able to be more creative as you put together groups and samples into groups, etc., etc. Going down the list, you have AND. So with AND, both control types must be in range to trigger the group. If any of the controls is not on the range, the groups do not trigger. Or is the opposite to AND, in that only one control needs to be in range for the group to trigger. Both need to be off range for the group not to trigger. And then not would be like a neither, right? Like an or, either or, something like that. So it is a control that needs to be above the range and the other control needs to be below the range. If both controls are above or below, then the range of the range, then the group does not trigger. So that's really all we have to explain here, all we have to see, I have to say here. What I'm gonna do is just load a different sample for this group and play with some of the parameters around to see if you get any more a more solid idea of what these parameters are doing. If you notice, I didn't tell you I had a different preset. I'm gonna stray away from that just to save time too. By now you should have gotten the idea of what helps you do. Let's see, let's go to import. Let's bring some random samples. Let's bring them. Let's see. I think I really have any other Let's see. This may take a little bit. Trying to load 3 samples, so I'm gonna leave it real time just so that you understand that even a simple thing as just loading stuff to a group is gonna create something. So this is my group number 3. I'm gonna, since this is a guitar plug sound, I'm gonna leave it as attack. I'm not gonna give it a fade in, but for the polyphony, I'm gonna set it to the very max. And now, instead of always, what I'm gonna do is a round robin. I'm gonna add 2 round robins. And then, well, I have 3 samples. Maybe I should add 3. So let's see. Maybe I should send them to and. Yeah, let's leave them all at and. Let's see. Let's take a listen real quick. Unfortunately, I cannot delete that one. I'm gonna delete this group here. And I guess I can delete the original one. Let's see. So had a random round robin. Notice as I started deleting some of these, but since I'm not pressing these notes over here, I'm not really getting the full effect of it, but you can get an idea of what that does. And I think it's pretty good for now. I'm gonna close the video at this point. So in the next video, again, we're gonna talk about the zone ones, the zone parameters or controls, and how that also ties into the group and the different nodes and zones that we have in the editor. And with that, I'm gonna leave you for this tutorial. Thanks to all the new subscribers. I noticed that there were quite a few subscribers while I was away. Yes, if you don't remember from the last video, I said that I was in China, completely uncommunicated. I couldn't put out any much stuff out there as I would have wanted. But that's fine. Now I'm back, and I'm gonna take, you know, the time to make sure that I cover as much as possible in the shortest amount of time as possible. I haven't forgotten about the new look and uploading the poetry to the channel. That's coming. I just need to organize myself and make the time and little by little do it. But it's happening this year. Make no mistake about it. It's gonna happen. Thanks for all the support. If this is the first time you've seen one of my videos, please make sure you comment, like, subscribe, share the word around, make sure that I reach more people. And if you have never seen my work, then all of the social media contacts are at the bottom of the video border right there on that little lower third. See you in the next video. Peace out, YouTube.